portions of KDKR's daily programming do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, do you really know how financial aid works? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. And you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, student loan forgiveness, let the craziness begin. Prudent Money contributor and college admissions expert John Hupalo is here to catch us up on the details. John, great to always have you on the program.
Bob, nice to be with you this afternoon.
You know, it's funny to me, and this is just so typical of what happens in Washington. Great idea on paper, but you have layers and layers of bureaucracy. Nobody knows what anybody's doing, and nobody bothered to put a game plan together to carry out what was on paper. And now you got all kinds of things happening. Thought I'd start off with a little bit of student loan forgiveness headlines. Federal student loan borrowers whose loans are not held by the U.S. Department of Education will no longer be able to consolidate for forgiveness as of Thursday. This was last week. Borrowers with FFEL or Perkins loans not held by the Education Department can only qualify for forgiveness if they apply for consolidation before September 29th. Of course, that was last week. Then my all-time favorite. Biden says that he has shaved $1.7 trillion off of the deficit, and that should pay for the approximate $1 trillion of student loan forgiveness. I won't even entertain that with what that means. Get us caught up, John. What is? It seems like the bottom's kind of fallen out of this idea.
Well, Bob, I got to tell you, I've always prided myself in being a little bit of a data nerd, and I love to get in the challenge of trying to explain these complex things in simple terms. But I got to tell you, we're on a Christian radio station, and I respect your show, so I won't tell you the first several words that come to my mind, but this is a mess. This is just a huge mess, and it was so predictable. You and I have talked about this since this crazy idea was launched back in 2016. The progressives on the Democratic Party wanted to forgive all student loan debt, and now they finally found a way to, they thought, execute this plan, even if it's limited. And what did they find out? They found out that they created much more of a mess, and it's what we talk about. They wanted a soundbite. They wanted to forgive student loan debt. They got their student loan debt soundbite, and now what do they have? This catastrophe sort of all around them. And I'll tell you, I think you're right. On paper, great soundbite, great execution, really hard to do. So the detail of this and the reason why it's so convoluted is that, they allowed some 40 million borrowers not to pay on their student loans since March of 2020. And they kept kicking the can down the lane month after month, quarter after quarter, now year after year. And finally, even the progressives started to say, look, we've got to just put an end to this. And so over the summer, they decided that they were going to put an end to it with the new Biden plan. And what has come out of that is that they're trying to do a whole bunch of things at the same time, and the wheels are coming off the bus for each one of them. And the bottom line is, I feel really sad for students and families who'd been promised this for so long, and then, you're in that headline you read, some of them thought they were in the game and they were going to have their loan forgiven, and now they find out, well, no, it's just a mess.
But I got to think, though, John, that this is going to be a scenario with this poor of communication as it is when it comes out of Washington. That there's, wow, I can't even imagine the number of student loan holders who think that this is going to come through for them, that it's not even going to be an option. I wonder what kind of percentage we're talking about.
Well, it's about 10% of all the borrowers that are out there. So they're a rough number. We'll say there are 40 million total student loan borrowers. About 4 million of them have about $100 billion of these loans that are now not eligible. These 4 million people woke up on August 25th saying, "Oh, this is really great. President Biden's going to forgive up to $10,000, maybe $20,000 of my loan. This is going to be terrific." And then, as you say, the devil in the detail comes out. And not to get too far into the detail, but the problem here, and the fact is that the Department of Education owns a whole lot of student loans, probably $1 trillion worth of student loans. But they don't own the other 600 or 700 billion. Those are owned, still owned and serviced by banks. You named two of those programs. The FFEL loan program was the one that preceded this current direct loan program. So there are a whole bunch of those loans outstanding. There are Perkins loans that are owned by universities. And so the federal government can't say to those private owners of those loans, "Hey, by the way, we want you to forgive $10,000 or $20,000 of the debt outstanding." They just don't have any legal standing to do that. People like me and others who followed this way too closely, we knew this was going to be a problem, and it is. And so now there are 3 lawsuits pending against this forgiveness program. And again, I go back to the borrowers, and you said it right. There are 4 million people out there that thought they were going to have $10,000 more in their pocket than it looks like they're going to have. And they were led down the wrong path, and I think it's just egregious that the politicians are allowing this to happen.
So what happens with these lawsuits? Does it shut the progress down of fulfilling the promise to give the money to forgive the loans? I mean, what ends up happening with that?
Yeah, so they're going to have to fast track all this. I was at a conference actually about a month ago with the student loan servicers were in the crowd, and they were all scrambling around like crazy because, again, August 24th, the Department of Education says, "We're going to do this, and by the way, we're going to create a form that borrowers have to fill out to be eligible. Some will have automatic, but some will not have automatic eligibility." And so they're creating this form, and then they said to the servicers, "Well, you've got to be ready to do this by the November-December time frame." And these folks the servicers are saying, "Well, wait a minute, our systems are set up one way, and now you're going to have 40 million people coming to us asking whether or not they're eligible for loan forgiveness in the next 40-day period." So it is a problem. But to get to your question, and it's the right one, there's a lot of fog out there right now, and trying to see how dense it is become the real issue. So with the lawsuits, they're going to try to get some kind of accelerated ruling on this. Honestly, I would think that they're not going to be successful. I don't know a lot about the law. Some of it hinges on 6 or 7 states which currently would tax the forgiven loan amount. So the sort of crux of some of these suits is that, well, if I'm going to participate in this program and you're going to tax me at the state level, I'd rather go through the student loan public service forgiveness program. So I want to opt out of this program and get into this other one. And again, more complexity on top of complexity. So before you ask me the home run question, Bob, I'm going to answer it for you. And I know your question is going to be, what should these families do?
You jumped ahead because I had like 2 or 3 home run questions before I even got to that.
All right, I'll make that home run number 60, and you can ask me 61 and 62. So obviously now, so to the New York Yankee Aaron Judge, who now has the American League record. But the home run question is, and we ask this and answer this almost every show we do together. If I'm sitting there with a student loan, what should I do? And I think you should contact your servicer because they're going to know where your loan resides. Does the Department of Education own that loan and you'll still be eligible for the forgiveness program? Is it owned by a third party, meaning private, one of these private entities? They'll know that as well. So, again, it goes back to making sure that you can contact your student loan servicer to get that right answer.
But what are the chances, the odds of having this all worked out by December 31st, 2022? And then it begs the question for people who are holding on to student loan debt that the payment's going to start back up again next year. Do I make my payment or not?
That's exactly right. And the answer to the question from the federal government is, we're going to do all of this in the next 45 or 60-day period.
What could go wrong?
75 days, right? Well, good luck with that. Again, the servicers that I talked to, and you talked about two of the things that would happen here. One is they have to contact all the borrowers to tell them, by the way, your loan repayment's going to start on January 1. So they've had to sort of charge down that path very quickly. They got no notice, by the way, of this. They just were told the end of August this is going to happen starting January 1. So they got to go out and contact all those borrowers. Then they have to contact the borrowers who may be eligible for this loan forgiveness program to say you've got to come and file this paper, which, by the way, we haven't gotten yet from the federal government. But when we do, we'll send it to you so you can send it back to us. And then the third thing that they're dealing with is a little now off the front page, but it was a big deal just a few months ago, is this student loan public service loan forgiveness program. You and I have talked about this in the past. This is that program where 1% of all the borrowers actually qualified after 10 years, and it was a huge debacle. Well, the government came in the beginning part of this year and said, hey, we're going to have a waiver and try and get more people involved with that. Well, guess what, Bob? And by the end of this month, October, that waiver expires. And so now there's this pressure to try to extend the waiver period. So all this is floating around, and I don't have my crystal ball to tell you what the percentage is, but I said this is a high percentage that all three of those can't happen in the next 75-day period.
Well, especially having an election, that's going to be a big distraction in Washington. It makes me wonder about what January of 2023, I mean, let's say minus this student loan forgiveness, what it looks like just cranking that system back up. How many people are going to be able to, we talk about this probably just about every time we're on the radio, but what are people going to be able to make their payments? Typically it's a pretty big payment, and they're not used to making it, which I think is the worst thing that they could have done to these student loan borrowers. What do you think it's going to look like?
It's going to be ugly. You're right, and the point that you made last is what I think is the number one point, is that borrowers are just not conditioned now for 30-plus months to have to make that payment, so they're spending that money elsewhere. And they're not thinking about making their student loan payment. Some of them may have even forgotten or want to conveniently forget that they have student loans. So they're out there, they're doing whatever they're doing with that extra money, and they're not allocating it in a disciplined way month after month to pay down that debt. So I think the delinquency rates will be through the roof. We'll see a bunch of the programs accessed again to try to relieve some of the month-to-month debt, but the debt payment amounts, but that's not going to happen until there's another sort of, I hate to say it this way, but it's kind of, what size mouse is going to go through the jaws of the snake, right? It's going to have to go through that system, and it's going to be ugly on the way down because, again, borrowers are not accustomed to making those payments. They may have the disposable income, but they haven't been allocating it, so they have to recalibrate their thought about having the discipline again to start making those payments. I do think it's going to be ugly, and I think your caution and throwing up the flag here and saying, look, there's not a lot of time to think about this. There's not a lot of time for the government to put a reasonable program in place. What's going to happen? And what's going to happen is borrowers could probably suffer more than if they had not had all these programs in place to begin with.
I just got to thinking about the person who's wondering if they're going to have the $10,000 forgiven, wondering what their payment's going to look like. They call their servicer. Their servicer gives them an answer. They're probably maybe not confident in that. I think, and let's just see what you say, but to me, if that payment shows up, I think you've got to make it.
Oh, yeah, I think that's exactly right. Because, again, underlying all of this, we haven't talked about it today, but we have in the past, if you don't make the payment, there's no easy way to escape this. It does not go away. Again, the fancy term, it's non-dischargeable in bankruptcy, which means that even if you declare bankruptcy, they can wipe out your credit card debt, they can do all kinds of things, your auto loans, get rid of all that stuff. you cannot rewrite these student loans unless you have severe economic hardship, and that's really difficult to prove. So again, I'm afraid that we're putting people in a place where they're going to say, well, there's some system here, because I've been hearing since 2016 that don't worry, you're not going to have to pay your student loan. There must be some way that I'm not going to have to pay it. And the rough lesson here in 2023 could be you do have to pay it, and so you ought to start paying as soon as you possibly can.
It makes me wonder. I just pulled up the usdebtclock.org, and the student loan debts, it says, according to this resource, is at $1.7 trillion. And how in the world because I never heard this number prior to President Biden signing the law, or signing the legislation on this, but supposedly this is going to cost $1 trillion. That doesn't make sense, does it?
No, it doesn't make sense. The numbers that I've seen range. The cost ranges from $300 billion to about $420 billion.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well.
Yeah, so I don't know where that $1 trillion number comes from. And those numbers, they are kind of all over the place. And again, I'm a little bit of a data nerd when it comes to this. I start digging around to say, well, how could there be such a huge range between 300 and 420? That's enough, let alone hundreds of billions. And it depends on what they think the take-up rate is going to be. So, for instance, the Biden administration thinks, on their estimate of $300 billion, they think that only 81% of the eligible borrowers who can get the $10,000 lopped off their loan will actually do that. That's their assumption. We can talk about whether or not we think that's reasonable or not. And then the other sort of big key driver to this, Bob, is the number of years that the estimate is for. So the Biden administration, they did an estimate of what the cost will be over 10 years, and they came to $300 billion, about $30 billion a year. When the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, the nonpartisan group that's supposed to stay away from the political fray, but maybe they do, maybe they don't, but their $420 billion includes a 30-year payout. So they consider what the total cost of the taxpayer will be over a 30-year period. And that explains some of the difference between $300 billion and $420 billion.
I wish I would have saved the link to this article, but it was a CNBC.com article, and they got the $1 trillion number from somebody at the Department of Education that's high up. But I was like, that does not seem correct. Well, we'll see how this plays out, but it's not a surprise. And this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. John Hupalo is with me, as he is every month, to talk a little bit about the college admissions process and everything that is college. And as a favor to my wife, John, I sat in on a Zoom call that was a college coach talking about how to manage the whole college expense process and everything. That's why I had to sit through that, I don't know. But anyway, I had to sit through it. And so it brought up a lot of questions for me, because the presentation was done in such a way that it just assumed that people knew more than they knew about financial aid, at least from my standpoint. What was kind of the way it came across to me. And so what I thought we would do is kind of back up and talk about some of the basics of college costs, especially now, October 1st, it's hard to believe it's October, but October 1st, the FAFSA form is there to be filled out. And so let's talk a little bit about the resources. And of course, we're not going to finish this week. We'll continue next time. But let's talk about the college counselor at school. Kind of what role do they play?
Yeah, that's really important, Bob. The role of the school counselor, I think, is the epicenter, like the first stop for every family when it comes to thinking about college. And the reason for that is that college I'm going to call them the college coach in the high school, but a college counselor. What they do is they're part of the fabric of the community. They've seen the students coming through the high school. They get to know them a little bit. Certainly by junior year, probably have your own assignment of a counselor. Some schools do it earlier than that. But there's this personal touch that's really important because when you talk about credibility, who knows the family, who knows the school, the way the school is presented to colleges, how some of the colleges actually think about graduates from the school. That's really significant information. And that sits right in the school counselor's office in every high school. So they are really the center of the whole conversation. What they do really well is, again, personalized touch. They know the circumstances of the student. They help the student package themselves, and that's a term that they use when we talk about getting a student ready. And you've been through this twice now. You want to create this application that shows the student the way they really are, their academic achievements or lack thereof sometimes. But the best you can in that light. What's the best way to present a B student or a C student? If this student wants to go to college, let's find a place where that'll be okay for them. So this idea of finding like an academic fit, those school counselors are tremendously good at that. Same thing. The second fit that we talk about all the time is social fit. What kind of challenge does this student like? What kind of kids does this student like to be around? The student can get a really good feel for that, obviously, because it's their life. They know what they like, but also the school counselors see them engaged in the school community, and then they can recommend schools and say, this school might be a really good academic and social fit. There are two things, though, that challenge the counselors in the schools. One is they're stretched really thin. It's not unusual for a school counselor to have 50 or more students that they're responsible for guiding through this process. So you can imagine that's a big burden. It's a big number for them.
Huge.
And second, it's huge. And by the way, in some places the number is like literally 200 to 1, 200 students to a counselor. So it's really difficult. The second, universally, the second point is counselors do not want to talk about money. They will not address family finances. They will not talk about the cost of a college. They will not give advice about how to pay for a college. It's verboten for them. They do not want to talk about it. And it's a very, very rare case that they'd have any part of that conversation. And every time I talk to one, I'm doing something actually in a school in New Jersey tomorrow night, and the counselor the other day said to me, just remember, I want you to talk about how to pay for college because we don't do that here. And this is a great school in New Jersey, and they don't want to do it. So that shows sort of why families can find themselves in a stress position where they're saying, you know what, I need a little bit more advice. I need a little more personal touch. Like, for instance, my student's going to write this essay. It's going to be a really critical part of the application, but they're not getting enough time with the counselor. Same thing on the financial side. And we can talk about this in more detail.
Yeah, we'll have
to
wrap
it's
it
a really
up.
critical point.
Yeah, we'll wrap this up and continue talking about this next month because I think it's great information. And I know that Grayson's counselor, my youngest, just was an incredible resource. So we'll talk more about that. Once again, I haven't been able to give it out yet, but mycollegecorner.com is a great resource. That's John's website. And he's got a book there that every parent should be reading if they've got college ahead of them. So, John, great to have you on the program. I always enjoy speaking with you. Talk to you next month.
Bob, thank you so much. Have a great day.
This is Bob Brooks saying you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. If you have a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com. Send it in because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.